Welcome to Shadows at Dusk. Dusk is not the end. It's the doorway between two worlds. A place where stories slip through, quiet, cold, and true. You've entered that space now, and what follows is meant for you. Stay in the shadow. Briarwood Ranch wasn't meant to be more than a fleeting obligation, a brief detour into my grandparents' legacy. Peace was the promise I'd made myself, the solace of simple mending, the sharp intake of untainted air, evenings steeped in quietude. What I found instead were unsettling miasmas clinging to the air, brutal claw gouges scarring weathered wood, and violent percussions erupting from the barn's shadowed depths. That particular brand of fear, blooming sudden and cold on soil that was mine by inheritance, that I hadn't anticipated. Those nights are now etched into my awareness, indelible. I feel compelled to articulate what transpired, to lay it bare with precision, leaving no room for misinterpretation of the experience. This isn't a fleeting memory, easily dismissed or buried. It breathes behind my eyelids, a relentless loop, replaying every sensation, every shadow. It began thus. Upon arrival, the first hours were consumed by the mundane task of settling into the main house. Neglect draped the structure like a shroud. Paint curled away from the exterior walls in long, desiccated strips. The porch groaned underfoot, its boards whispering of instability, a repair noted for later attention. Inside, dust-laden sheets ghosted over antiquated furniture in the living room. Tugging them free, flinging open the windows, I invited the breeze, which carried the musty perfume of mildew and aged timber. Dust motes danced, catching in my throat, provoking coughs. Eventually, broom in hand, I swept, the familiar rhythm, a small anchor in the unfamiliar space. Fatigue settled in, but resolve stiffened my spine. This place would become habitable. Midday found me drawn towards the barn, standing apart at the property's edge. My father had always spoken of its seniority over the house, a structure supposedly raised by my great-grandfather for livestock, though decades had passed since any creature sheltered within. The earth surrounding it lay parched and fractured, tenacious weeds thrusting through the cracked dirt. Its great door slumped, weary on corroded hinges. Even before I touched it, a stagnant, musty odor reached me. The push elicited a tortured screech from the hinges, unleashing a wave of stale, confined air. Dust particles swirled, illuminated within the slender shafts of sunlight piercing the wall gaps. A cursory glance revealed emptiness, save for scattered, rotting planks, corroded tools, and a hulking wooden crate slumped in a far corner. The ground beneath was a rough tapestry of dirt and decaying straw. An inexplicable chill traced its way down my spine. I initially shrugged it off. Then my eyes caught them. Deep lacerations marring the left-hand wall, unmistakably claw marks. Each score dug savagely into the wood, leaving behind frayed, splintered edges. I recall the morbid curiosity compelling my hand to trace their length, roughly the span of my own hand, suggesting immense, thick claws. A tremor ran through me, my pulse quickening, though I wrestled for composure. Perhaps some wild animal had become trapped, a plausible, fleeting thought. Yet multiple sets scarred the wood, some high, some low, crisscrossing in a frantic geometry, as if escape had been attempted from various desperate angles. Following the trail of destruction towards the back corner, my gaze fell upon a fractured section of planking near knee height. The wood was splintered outwards, violently torn. Something had forced its exit. Adjacent to this breach, the ground bore impressions, footprints unsettlingly large, dwarfing any canine or coyote track I'd ever encountered. Their shape was aberrant, not the clean definition of a paw, but splayed, indistinct, accompanied by a dragging furrow in the dirt, hinting at a heavy, limping gait. Crouching, I examined them closer. They led towards the barn's rear, terminating near a jumble of stacked boards. A wave of profound unease washed over me, my heart hammering against my ribs. Touching the compacted earth, cold beneath my fingers, I could discern the vague outline of digits or talons. No fresh scat, no other biological sign offered explanation. Rising, I attempted to dispel the encroaching dread. Deep breaths, a conscious effort to rationalize. The barn's inherent oldness permeated the air, yet beneath it lay a faint, distinct undertone, something akin to damp fur. A raccoon, perhaps, or a larger denizen seeking refuge. I circled the interior perimeter, probing every shadowed recess. No creature revealed itself, no fresh sign of habitation, yet the disturbing images of gouges and malformed tracks lingered. A glance at my watch confirmed the day's rapid decline. Retreating to the house, I prepared a simple meal: bread, tinned soup, bottled water, consumed on the porch as twilight bled across the sky in hues of pale orange. The breeze cooled my skin. Silence reigned, punctuated only by the occasional rustle from the tree line. My gaze drifted towards the barn. It seemed to possess its own gravity, darker than its surroundings, swallowing the fading light. I forced myself to look away, the memory of those marks a persistent burr beneath my thoughts, even as I insisted on a logical cause. Nightfall enclosed the old bedroom. The mattress offered little comfort, its stiffness matched by the rough texture of the sheets. My belongings were sparse: a duffel bag, my phone. Sleep proved elusive. Each drift towards unconsciousness was snagged by phantom sounds from outside. Hours passed before a fragile calm allowed me to doze. Then, wrenched from sleep in the dead of night, a muffled bang. I lay suspended between waking and dreaming, listening. Another bang, heavier this time, unmistakably originating from the barn. The sound of solid impact against the door. Throwing on jeans and shoes, flashlight clutched tight, I crept to the window. Nothing stirred in the moon-drenched yard. The barn stood monolithic and dark. Then again, a heavy, resonant thud against wood. My heart became a frantic drum against my sternum. Outside, the night air bit at my bare arms. A sharp, alien scent tainted the breeze, acrid like scorched hair or burning rubber. My pulse surged. Slowly, cautiously, I approached the barn, each footstep stirring small puffs of dust. 10 feet away, a low growl emanated from within. Deep, sustained, a primal warning that vibrated in the air. I froze. The flashlight beam danced nervously across the ancient door, revealing a subtle trembling in the wood, as if immense pressure were being applied from the other side. My hand shook, a betraying tremor, fighting the instinct to flee back to the fragile safety of the house. "Hello?" The word emerged thin, quavering in the vast silence. The growling ceased abruptly. I waited, breath held captive, straining for any response. Silence stretched, untaught and expectant. Then a soft, deliberate scrape against the door, the unmistakable sound of claws dragging across the grain. My mouth turned to dust. The odor, damp fur, and that burnt, chemical stench intensified, threatening to gag me. Sweat beaded on my skin despite the chill. One hesitant step forward, my palm flat against the door. It pulsed with a low, internal thud. Then, absolute stillness. I listened, every nerve straining, the flashlight beam jittering wildly across the ground. Standing there indefinitely was impossible. With a slow, deliberate pull, I opened the barn door. Its hinges screamed in protest. The flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, illuminating patches of straw, the rough texture of a support beam, then vacant space. No creature met my gaze. My eyes swept the corners, desperate and fearful. Nothing moved. The stench was overpowering now, wet dog mixed with charred wood. Steeling myself, I stepped inside, the light carving arcs through the oppressive dark. No animals, no fresh tracks on the disturbed floor. Crouching low, I directed the beam towards the far wall. Fresh scratches gleamed wetly in the light, raw wood exposed. Shards littered the ground beneath, newly splintered. These marks trailed sideways, ending near the previously noted broken section of wall. A sudden urge to check the exterior around the back seized me, but the barn door slammed shut behind me with shocking violence. A strangled cry escaped me. The flashlight nearly slipped from my grasp. Heart pounding like a war drum, I spun, fumbling for the handle, yanking the door open once more. A gust of wind met me as I stumbled back outside, frantically sweeping the light across the yard. Empty. Nothing moved. My own ragged breathing filled my ears. Exhaustion warred with stark terror. I retreated hastily to the house, locking the door, the remainder of the night spent wide awake on the couch, bathed in the artificial glare of electric light. My thoughts churned, grasping at explanations. A feral dog of unusual size, a displaced bear, something else. None felt adequate. The misshapen prints, the pervasive, unique stench, the sheer violence implied by the marks. Bears were unheard of in this region, the ranch isolated from their known habitats. Morning arrived gray and unwelcome, finding me stiff-backed, head throbbing, a bitter taste coating my tongue. Coffee, brewed on the antiquated stove, did little to soothe frayed nerves. Whatever resided in that barn, I was ill-equipped to face it, yet the gnawing need for answers persisted. Donning work boots and gloves, armed with a heavier flashlight and a pry bar for uncertain utility, I ventured out. Sunlight rendered the ranch deceptively calm. The barn door hung ajar, just as I'd abandoned it. Forcing myself across the threshold, I commenced a meticulous search. The noxious smell, though muted by daylight, still clung stubbornly to the aged wood. Behind stacked boards, beneath crates, along every wall, nothing. Living or dead, the space yielded no culprit. My attention returned to the fresh scratches. They differed subtly from the previous day's findings. Cleaner cuts, the wood fibers freshly torn. Near one cluster, a clump of coarse hair snagged on a splinter. Dark gray, nearly black, it felt disturbingly oily between my gloved fingers. I carefully collected it in a small plastic bag, an instinctive act without clear purpose, perhaps evidence for some future, uncertain identification. A deep-seated anxiety whispered that it wouldn't match any local fauna. Suppressing the unease, I continued my work, clearing debris near the barn's foundation, seeking a hidden lair, finding another set of those strange footprints near the rear opening. They tracked briefly towards a thicket of bushes, then simply ceased. Hours bled away without revelation. Lunch was a sandwich consumed while perched on an overturned bucket near the entrance. Mid-chew, a faint shuffling sound from a shadowed corner arrested my movement. I held my breath, listening intently. Standing slowly, peering into the gloom, revealed only dancing dust motes and the silent geometry of stacked crates. That familiar unease prickled my skin, tightening my stomach. Gooseflesh rose on my arms despite the warmth. Calm, I told myself. Maintain calm. The second night descended with unwelcome speed. Shadows stretched long and skeletal across the yard as the sun dipped below the hills. I resolved to watch the barn from a distance, positioning myself near my truck, flashlight ready, pry bar close at hand. Crickets began their nightly chorus. A gentle breeze stirred the tall grass. An hour passed. Then, movement near the barn door, a swift, indistinct blur. The door rattled once, sharply, then fell silent. Heart hammering, I advanced, probing the darkness with the flashlight beam. No discernible shape. I held the light steady on the door, waiting, muscles tensed. Nothing. A cold sweat traced a path down my spine. Something rustled near the barn's corner. I swung the light. The beam illuminated weeds, the decaying fence line. Still nothing concrete. Then, for a fleeting half-second, 2 points of light reflected back, eyes, before vanishing behind the fence. I froze, breath catching. They seemed too widely spaced for any common animal, though the darkness played tricks. My hand trembled, struggling to keep the flashlight steady. No sound of footfalls, yet an undeniable sense of immense presence lingered nearby, moving stealthily in the blackness. The moment passed, silence returned, heavy and watchful. I felt profoundly alone, yet utterly certain I was not. Something was out there. The night became a vigil of restless pacing between house and barn, seeking a clear glimpse, attempting to corner the unseen. Futile. Sporadically, the low growl would rumble from within the barns or behind it, retreating whenever I drew near. The cloying scent of damp fur waxed and waned, often accompanied by that sharp, burnt smell. My stomach churned with each olfactory assault. By dawn's first light, adrenaline was my only fuel. The desire for answers wrestled with an escalating urge to flee. The ensuing days fell into a grim pattern. Mornings revealed fresh gouges in the wood, new sets of the bizarre footprints, more clumps of that dark, oily hair. The barn door bore fresh dents, testament to nocturnal assaults from within. On several occasions, I discovered patches of wood seemingly scorched, as if subjected to brief, intense heat. The thought of calling authorities surfaced, animal control, a ranger, but faltered at the sheer inexplicability of it all. How to articulate this without sounding unhinged? Instead, I reinforced the barn door with additional planks, hammered home with grim finality. It was a futile gesture. The nightly cacophony persisted, the banging, the guttural growls echoing across the yard. Sleep became a forgotten luxury. My body screamed fatigue, my nerves frayed thin, startled by every innocuous sound. By week's end, I existed on the raw edge of endurance. On what would be my final night, the breaking point arrived. Seated in the living room's ancient armchair, lamplight pooling around me, I heard the barn door begin its violent shuddering. A spike of adrenaline shot through me. My palms grew slick. Rising, grabbing the flashlight and pry bar, fueled by a volatile cocktail of exhaustion, anger, and terror, I marched onto the porch and straight towards the barn, ignoring the frantic cadence of my pulse. The door rattled furiously. I struck it hard with the pry bar. "I know you're in there." The yell tore from my throat, ragged and trembling, a desperate plea for confrontation. A sharp, ferocious growl answered, deeper, more resonant than before, vibrating through the very wood beneath my hand. My knees threatened to buckle. The stench of wet fur slammed into me, thick and suffocating. I coughed, eyes stinging. Then, utter silence descended. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, pry bar gripped tight, breath sawing in my chest, eyes burning from sleeplessness, my entire frame trembling. The barn door remained still. The silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. Taking a stumbling step back, the futility washed over me. This thing, whatever it was, couldn't be fought or driven off like some common nuisance. Fear, cold and absolute, surged anew. The decision crystallized: leave the barricades, retreat to the house, lock everything, and plan my escape with the dawn. The remaining hours were spent staring at the ceiling, punctuated by sporadic knocks and growls from outside, but I refused to venture out again. My body was rigid with tension, my nerves shredded beyond repair. At sunrise, I loaded my truck with numb efficiency. The unfinished repairs, the dust sheets, the lingering scent of decay, none of it mattered. I locked the house, cast one final wary glance at the silent barn from a safe distance, and drove away. The rearview mirror became an object of obsession during the drive, half expecting pursuit. I haven't returned. Briarwood Ranch remains mine legally, but the thought of spending another night within its boundaries is untenable. I've shared fragments of the experience with close friends, cloaked in vagueness, unwilling to invite scrutiny or disbelief. The truth remains stark and inexplicable. The gouges, the prints, the smells, the sounds. Something resides there, something that made its claim clear. Its presence was a palpable weight each night. This is the unvarnished account. No body discovered, no definitive identification made. I never saw it clearly, never suffered physical harm. I fled before escalation could occur. The barn still stands on that lonely plot of land, and the question haunts me. Does the entity still lurk within its shadows? Does it still stalk the property under the cloak of darkness, dragging its unseen weight, scarring the walls, leaving its strange, scorched signature? Certainty eludes me. All I possess is the visceral conviction never to set foot in that barn again. That place is forbidden territory now. Sleep offers little respite. The growls echo in the chambers of my memory, the stench of damp fur and burnt matter clinging phantom-like to my senses. I don't know if the memory will ever truly fade. It feels too immediate, too raw, too present. For now, distance is my only defense, my only hope. The invitation felt less like a suggestion and more like a summons. A weekend reprieve beckoned from a cabin nestled deep within folds of forest, miles from the nearest flicker of town lights. Friends, colleagues, Finn, Leo, Maya, and I sought refuge from the city's relentless hum, dreaming of wood smoke, easy camaraderie, and perhaps the quiet industry of hiking boots on trails. Arrival was immersion. The air thickened, sounds sharpened, the profound quietude of the place settling over us like dust. It was another realm entirely, hushed and watchful. We were a comfortable quartet, knitted together by shared office spaces and inside jokes, bypassing the awkward preliminaries for immediate ease. That first day unfolded with sun-dappled perfection, lounging on the porch, the sizzle and scent of grilling, clinking bottles, conversation meandering like the nearby creek. Dusk bled into night, leaving us steeped in a pleasant weariness. Later, gathered around the flickering tongues of a campfire, Finn, ever the provocateur, leaned in, his face cast in shifting shadow. "You realize?" he began, a familiar smirk playing on his lips. This place sat empty for decades, just abandoned. Previous owner walked out one day, poof. We offered obligatory eye rolls. Finn's appetite for the unsettling was well documented, but the smirk faded, replaced by an unnerving earnestness. "Seriously," he pressed, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "Locals whisper about it, claim it's haunted, nocturnal noises, things that don't belong, people disappearing out here." Leo scoffed, a sharp bark of laughter. "Give me a break." Maya, however, drew her jacket closer, a visible tremor running through her. Could we maybe not with the ghost stories when we're literally stranded in the wilderness? Her gaze darted towards the impenetrable darkness encircling our small island of firelight. We deflected with forced levity, shifting the talk to safer shores, yet Maya's unease lingered, a subtle dissonance in the night air. I didn't buy Finn's tale, not truly, but the woods after dark possessed a potent suggestibility, whispering that solitude was an illusion. Weariness eventually claimed us. The cabin offered 2 bedrooms. Leo and I took one, Finn and Maya the other. Sleep found me swiftly, pulling me under like a tide. Then, sometime in the suffocating blackness of deep night, I surfaced. Disoriented, I strained my ears against the silence, broken only by Leo's rhythmic breathing from the adjacent bed. Blackness, absolute. Then a sound, delicate yet distinct. Tap, tap, tap. It emanated from the window pane beside my bed. My breath hitched, heart beginning a frantic tattoo against my ribs, so faint, like fingernails tracing glass. Leo slept on, oblivious. A branch, surely, wind-tossed debris, yet the rhythm was too steady, too patient. Tap, 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 measured, deliberate, as if something outside knew we were within, listening. I lay paralyzed, caught between disbelief and rising dread. Minutes stretched taut, then the tapping ceased. A ragged sigh escaped me. Imagination, I insisted. Nerves frayed by Finn's story. But closing my eyes offered no solace, only the persistent, prickling certainty of unseen scrutiny. Morning light brought a fragile return to normalcy. Over coffee, I recounted the nocturnal disturbance. Finn seized upon it instantly, his grin wide. "See? Told you. Prime spook territory." But Maya's face was ashen, "You're joking, right?" she pleaded, her eyes fixed on mine. I attempted nonchalance, shrugging. "Probably nothing. Wind, a loose shutter." Her skepticism remained palpable. For the rest of the day, she clung to the cabin's vicinity, refusing excursions deeper into the woods. A pang of guilt hit me for voicing my experience, yet an undeniable wrongness had settled over the place. A subtle shift in the atmosphere. That evening, an unspoken tension hurried us towards bedtime. We retreated to our rooms earlier, the easy comfort of the previous night, replaced by a brittle anxiety. Darkness reclaimed the cabin. I lay rigid, straining against the silence, anticipating. Around midnight, it returned. Tap, tap, tap. Eyes snapping open, I was instantly awake, his heart hammering. The same soft, insistent rhythm against the glass. Leo remained still, lost to sleep. Just the tapping, I told myself. Just the tapping. But then something new entwined with it. A whispering, barely audible, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Sibilant murmurs, indistinct words breathed against the night. A cold dread coiled in my stomach. I yearned to shake Leo awake, to have a witness, but fear held me immobile. Trapped, I listened to the dual assault, the patient tapping, the insidious whispering, every nerve alight. It seemed an eternity before the sounds finally dissolved back into the oppressive silence. Sleep, when it eventually came, was shallow and troubled. The following morning, relaying the night's events felt different. Maya looked genuinely terrified, her hands trembling as she gripped her mug. "This isn't funny anymore," she choked out, voice quivering. "If this is some elaborate prank, Finn." He shook his head, his usual mischievous glint replaced by wide-eyed concern. "I swear it's not me. Didn't hear a thing." The day passed under a pall of shared fear. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle in the undergrowth set us jumping. Even Finn seemed subdued, casting nervous glances towards the tree line. We huddled near the cabin, the surrounding woods now feeling menacing, pregnant with unseen watchers. Nightfall was dreaded. We lingered in the main room, lights blazing defiantly against the encroaching dark, conversation strained and hushed. Eventually, the inevitable could be postponed no longer. With tense good nights, we retreated. In the blackness of the bedroom, I waited, breath held, muscles clenched, and precisely as expected, some tap, tap, tap. Louder now, more demanding, as if patience had worn thin. I bolted upright, gasping, fear of physical constriction in my chest. Across the room, Leo was sitting up too, eyes huge in the gloom, fixed on mine. He'd heard it. "What is that?" he breathes, his voice ragged. I could only shake my head, mute with terror. The tapping hammered on, relentless, filling the small space. Then the whispering joined, no longer faint but chillingly clear, a raspy invocation right outside the glass. Words remained elusive, yet the intent was unmistakable, a beckoning, a drawing out. The sound of our names distorted, woven into the sibilant drone. Ice flooded my veins. We had to escape. My hand shot out, grabbing Leo's arm. We stumbled into the hallway, bursting into the other bedroom. Finn and Maya were already awake, stark terror etched onto their faces. "Leave," I managed, the word a strangled whisper. "Now." No questions asked, a frantic scramble ensued, grabbing essentials, fumbling with jackets, a desperate flight out the cabin door into the consuming night. We didn't look back. Towering trees loomed like skeletal giants as we piled into the car, the engine's roar a welcome violence against the unnatural quiet. Driving away, the tapping and whispering receded, swallowed by the forest, but the fear clung to us, a suffocating shroud. Silence reigned in the car, each of us locked in the chilling memory, the horror a palpable presence. That cabin remained behind us, a dark stain on the edge of the woods, unvisited, unspoken of, forever haunted in our minds. Bathed in the honeyed light of dusk, the cottage shimmered, a postcard idol of weathered stone and deep thatch, whispering promises of the pastoral tranquility we craved. Yet as my fingers wrestled with the stubborn brass key, an insidious cold traced its path along my vertebrae. A conviction settled, heavy and unwelcome. Unseen eyes observed our arrival from the shadowed depths behind the diamond-paned glass. "Papa, hurry, my room." Elodie, my daughter, vibrated with impatience, her small hand tugging my sleeve, momentarily banishing the spectral chill. A smile, thin but present, stretched across my face as the lock finally yielded with a groan. The threshold sighed open, releasing a breath thick with disuse and the dry perfume of age. Clara, my wife, crinkled her nose, yet her voice bloomed with forced brightness. "Just needs the windows thrown wide, Elias, doesn't it?" I offered a nod, a silent echo of her strained optimism. Years of scrimping, dreaming of this escape from the city's clamor, culminating in this moment, a haven for Elodie, a new chapter for us all, this refuge. Exploring its bones that first evening, the cottage spoke in a language of groans and sighs, each articulation fraying my nerves. Just the house settling, I reasoned. Ancient timbers contract, old walls whisper tales, perfectly normal. But the sharp retort of a door slamming shut upstairs, while the three of us stood clustered in the nascent kitchen, defied such easy dismissal. "I'll investigate," I volunteered, striving to anchor the tremor in my voice. Clara's gaze held concern, but she remained silent. Ascending the narrow, winding stairs felt like climbing into a throat of shadows. The dying light struggled to pierce the small, grimy panes above. My hand skimmed the rough-textured plaster as I navigated the dim corridor. The door designated for Elodie's sanctuary stood slightly ajar. Slowly, cautiously, I pushed it inward. Emptiness reigned within the room, undisturbed since our earlier cursory glance. Yet pivoting to depart, a detail snagged my gaze. Stark against the sill's gray film of neglect lay the perfect impression of a hand, impossibly petite, belonging to no soul among us. A frantic drumbeat commenced against my ribs. Retreating, step by cautious step, I sealed the discovery within myself, unwilling to poison our first night with this nascent fear. Later, cocooned in the embrace of a protesting bed frame, the unfamiliar symphony of the countryside, a stark counterpoint to the city's drone, Clara's whisper sliced the darkness. "Elias, did we choose rightly? Coming here? I drew her nearer, inhaling the comforting landscape of her hair. Undoubtedly, it simply requires acclimation. The words felt hollow even as they left my lips, underscored moments later by a protracted, low moan that seemed to emanate from the very marrow of the house. We both jolted upright, ears straining against the oppressive dark. What was that? Clara's voice was a fragile thread. The wind, likely, I offered, a lie tasting like ash. Old structures have their own peculiar music. Sleep eventually claimed us, though it was a thin, troubled veil. My dreamscapes were populated by indistinct forms, flickering at the periphery, by susurrations in tongues unknown. Morning found us frayed, steeped in exhaustion, yet attempting the rituals of settling in. Elodie, blessedly untouched by the night's tension, charted the cottage's geography with unbridled glee. Unpacking cartons in the sitting room, I became aware of it, a faint, rhythmic scratching from within the walls. Mice, I initially presumed, an expected footnote in rural living. But the sound persisted, intensified through the day, a restless, insistent scrabbling that seemed to migrate, shadowing our movements, perpetually just beyond the plaster. Clara heard it too. Her eyes widened as a particularly vigorous burst erupted from behind the hearth. Perhaps an exterminator, she ventured, her voice taut beneath a veneer of calm. I nodded, grasping the offered normalcy. I'll find one. But my mobile displayed only bleak emptiness, no signal. The newly installed landline responded with a hiss of static, severing our fragile tether to the outside world. We were adrift. That night, the veil thinned further. Elodie's scream tore through the silence, sharp and terrified. We scrambled to her bedside to find her bolt upright, eyes vast with horror. A lady, she wept, collapsing into Clara's embrace. Dressed in old clothes, she just stood there, watching. My frantic search yielded nothing tangible, no forced entry, no earthly explanation for her vision. Turning back towards the small, trembling figure, my foot connected with an object. On the floorboards lay a small antique doll, porcelain-faced and unsettlingly serene. A doll I would swear hadn't been there at tuck-in. The following day unfolded under a pall of dread. Anomalies multiplied. Books tumbled from shelves untouched. Pockets of inexplicable cold materialized, our breath pluming in sunlit rooms and permeating everything, the constant unnerving sensation of being scrutinized. Clara and I clung to rationalizations, constructing flimsy explanations for the inexplicable. The facade crumbled when we discovered Elodie in the kitchen, deep in conversation with an empty corner, her earnest descriptions painting a portrait of a little boy invisible to our eyes. "We need assistance, Elias," Clara stated, her voice trembling. "This defies reason, all of it." Agreement was easy, action impossible. Phones remained useless. The car inexplicably refused to start, its engine stubbornly silent. Miles lay between us and the nearest dwelling, and the thought of traversing those deserted lanes as dusk bled into night filled me with a primal fear. As darkness enveloped the cottage once more, the unseen forces crescendoed. Objects launched themselves across rooms with unseen impetus. Disembodied whispers slithered from vacant corners. The scratching within the walls escalated into a furious clawing, as if something desperately sought egress. We huddled together in the sitting room, flinching at every creak, every dancing shadow. Elodie, having sobbed herself into a fitful sleep, lay nestled between us on the worn sofa. What can we do? Clara's voice was raw, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion and tears. I opened my mouth, searching for solace, for some non-existent plan, when a simultaneous extinction plunged us into absolute black. A silence fell, profound and terrifying. Even the incessant scratching abruptly ceased. A fragile tendril of hope unfurled. Perhaps it was over. Then, originating from the upper floor, the deliberate cadence of heavy footfalls began its descent. Thump, thump, thump. A slow perambulation overhead, drawing inexorably nearer. Clara's fingers dug into my arm, pain unnoticed amidst the rising panic. Her breathing hitched, ragged beside me. Run, my instincts screamed. Grab Elodie, flee into the night. But terror held me fast, a statue carved from fear. The treads reached the stairwell's apex. Thump, thump, thump. Descending now, the antique wood groaning beneath an invisible burden. Who is there? The question tore from my throat, a thin, reedy sound. The measured pace ceased. Silence stretched, taut, and unbearable. And then a voice, ancient and fractured, laced with venom, curled out of the darkness. "This is our home," it rasped, "and you trespass." Immediately, a sibilant tide rose around us, dozens of voices echoing the sentiment, weaving a chilling tapestry of sound. Trespass, trespass, trespass. Elodie awoke with a shriek, her cry swallowed by the ghostly cacophony. Furniture began to shudder violently, portraits leapt from the walls, and an unnatural wind, frigid and rank with decay, tore through the room. In that maelstrom of pure terror, paralysis shattered. I swept Elodie into my arms, seized Clara's hand, and bolted for the door. We spilled into the cool mercy of the night, running blindly until the road met our feet. Gasping, chests heaving, I risked a glance back. The cottage stood inert, lightless, resuming its mask of quaint normalcy. But framed in an upper window, a silhouette resolved. A woman, her attire archaic, her face contorted into a smile of pure malice. As I watched, transfixed, she lifted a hand in a slow, deliberate wave, a gesture of mocking dismissal. Then she vanished, leaving only empty, dark glass. Our belongings remained unclaimed. We walked through the starlit hours, following the ribbon of road until the first lights of a distant town offered sanctuary. Days passed before the words could form, before we dared revisit the nightmare etched onto our minds. We never went back. We abandoned the cottage and the spectral tenants who guarded it so fiercely. Yet sometimes, in the deepest quiet of the night, the whispers return, faint but persistent. The feeling of unseen eyes lingers in the periphery. and I am left to wonder if escape is ever truly absolute, or if some fragment of us remains snared within those walls, forever intruders in a home not our own. The old house whispered secrets I hadn't come to hear. My only intent was remediation, a quick sale, an escape from the weight of inherited neglect. Years it had stood vacant, succumbing to the slow siege of time, the roof weeping rainwater, the paint curling from the clapboards like sunburnt skin, the very air inside thick with the suffocating breath of stillness. I pulled up that Friday, the morning sun already harsh, and surveyed the surrendered territory. Weeds choked the lawn, a scraggly green tide dotted with the flotsam of street litter. The crunch of my boots on the path felt like an intrusion. Unlocking the front door unleashed a phantom cloud of dust, a powdery greeting that rasped in my throat. Inside, the past lay embalmed, furniture shrouded in ghostly white sheets, ancestral faces staring blankly from wall-hung frames, every horizontal surface veiled in a uniform shroud of grime. A tremor of disquiet coursed through me, instantly dismissed as the predictable melancholy of a place long unloved. My strategy began below ground. The cellar, a perennial source of damp woes during my childhood, seemed the logical starting point. My father's long-ago complaints about the fickle sump pump and encroaching damp echoed in memory. Check the foundations, then ascend, a sensible plan. I twisted the knob on the basement door, fumbled for the switch. Nothing. The bulb remained stubbornly dark. My phone's beam sliced through the gloom as I descended the protesting wooden stairs, each tread groaning under my weight. At the bottom, my light reflected off an unexpected surface. Water. Ankle-deep, stagnant, the color of long-steeped tea, it permeated the air with a fetid miasma, reminiscent of grave dirt and forgotten washing. My gut clenched. I swept the light around. Waterlogged shelves sagged. Cardboard boxes gaped open, their contents ruined. Forgotten tools wore blooms of rust. A faint, persistent trickling whispered against the concrete walls, the sound of water searching endlessly for egress. Near the defunct sump pump, pipes vanished into the murky depths. Clearly, a more formidable pump was required before any real work could commence. Annoyance warred with a strange flicker of anticipation. The challenge of taming this sordid and sodden space appealed to some primal, problem-solving instinct. A trip to the hardware emporium yielded a heavy-duty submersible pump, thick rubber gauntlets, and knee-high boots. Back in the oppressive silence of the house, I wrestled the equipment into the cellar's damp embrace. Positioning the pump in a low corner, I threaded its discharge hose through a grimy casement window, aiming the outflow onto the blighted lawn. The satisfying hum of the motor starting was a small victory against the decay. Water began its reluctant retreat. Relief washed over me, brief and shallow. Then perhaps 10 minutes into the draining, a different sound surfaced. A low, resonant hum, muffled, indistinct. The hairs on my neck prickled. I spun around, phone light stabbing the shadows. Nothing but dripping walls and the churning water. An anomaly of the pipes, I reasoned, or the pump's own laboring drone. Yet as more concrete emerged from the receding flood, the hum returned, subtly altered. It possessed a cadence now, the ghost of a voice submerged, syllables lost in the liquid distortion. A faint ringing commenced in my ears, blurring the line between perception and paranoia. Drawn closer to the pump, the sound intensified, yet remained stubbornly unintelligible, until, unmistakably, woven into the subaqueous thrumming, I heard it, my name, Julian. Low, waterlogged, distorted, but undeniably there. My heart kicked against my ribs. I killed the power to the pump. Silence crashed down, broken only by the ragged tempo of my own breathing and the amplified drip, drip, drip from sodden joists overhead. The basement held a peculiar resonance now. My phone's battery indicator glowed ominously low. Retreat seemed prudent. Leaving the pump silenced for the day, I secured the house, the drive home a tense exercise in rationalization. Stress, wind whistling through foundation cracks, anything but the impossible sound I'd heard. The following morning, armed with a powerful lantern, spare bulbs, and a new ceiling fixture, I returned. Installing the light was a small battle against corroded wiring, but eventually, a single stark bulb cast a weak circle of illumination. My stomach sank. Overnight, the water had reclaimed its territory, rising just as high as before. The pump sat forlornly half-drowned. Frustration gnawed at me. How was it returning so swiftly? Phone in hand, ready to summon a plumber, I hesitated. One more try. I reactivated the pump. The hose outside vomited brown water onto the struggling grass. Again, the level began to drop. Again, after 10 minutes, the hum commenced. That same garbled, behind-a-barrier quality pulsing in brief, irregular bursts. My muscles locked, my jaw tightened. Beads of sweat formed on my brow despite the cellar's chill. The sound sharpened, coalesced. My name, Julian, surfaced again, clearer this time. The lantern trembled in my grip. I stood paralyzed, watching the water near the pump's intake begin to move with unnatural coherence. It eddied, swirled, then bulged upward, forming a transient aqueous effigy, the suggestion of a head and shoulders breaking the surface. My pulse hammered in my throat. The shape dissolved as the pump momentarily sputtered, the water collapsing back into chaotic ripples. I silenced the machine, staring intently at the now still water, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. After a moment's hesitation, I waded toward the center, boots sloshing, the water now climbing toward my knees. Leaning down, I plunged a gloved hand into the cold, slick liquid, feeling for the concrete floor beneath. No obvious fissures, no unusual currents. Standing upright, I braced myself against a wave of primal fear, telling myself it was overwrought nerves, a trick of the light and churning water. Perhaps the source lay elsewhere. I retreated upstairs, tracing the plumbing lines through the main floor. Kitchen, bathroom, the pipes were ancient, but appeared sound, no signs of catastrophic failure. Returning to the basement stairwell, I peered down into the dimness. The water lay placid. One more time, I told myself, just to be certain. I flipped the pump switch again, remaining at the top of the stairs, lantern beam fixed on the cellar floor. The motor whined. Water began its exodus. Minutes stretched. Then the low thrumming began, a faint vibration escalating into audible sound. It shaped itself into my name, Julian. I clutched the railing, a profound chill seizing my body. Below, the water stirred, gathered itself. A torso, arms, pushing upward from the surface, a fluid silhouette against the murk. Julian, the voice was clearer, resonant. The lantern nearly slipped from my grasp. My heart felt dangerously overwrought. With a convulsive movement, I cut the power. The shape submerged instantly. The hum ceased. In the ensuing quiet, my own frantic breathing sounded unnervingly loud. I switched off the basement light, slammed the door shut, and locked it. Outside, slumped in the driver's seat of my truck, tremors ran through my hands. Who could I possibly tell? The story felt ludicrous even in my own head. Instead, I drove back to the hardware store, seeking practical counsel for intractable flooding. A stronger pump, a backup system, the clerk suggested. I purchased a second pump, along with powerful floodlights and sheets of thick rubber, a desperate arsenal against the encroaching mystery. My new plan: drain the water with overwhelming speed, expose any hidden ingress, find a rational explanation, a spring, a fractured pipe, anything but the shape, the voice. That evening, I transformed the cellar into an illuminated interrogation chamber. Floodlights banished shadows, casting the stained concrete and rusted pipes in stark, unforgiving relief. I positioned the two pumps in opposing corners and activated them simultaneously. Water surged through the hoses. For several minutes, though only the drone of the motors filled the space. Then the hum returned. I stood rigid, forcing myself to observe. The water churned violently. My name echoed, the garbled quality persisting, yet somehow more insistent. The shape rose again, more defined this time, coalescing from the turbulence. A human face, sculpted from water, featureless yet undeniably present, indentations for eyes, a mouth. Fluid arms gestured with agonizing slowness, seeming to reach. My knees threatened to buckle. Breathing became a conscious, ragged effort. A dull pounding started behind my eyes. I watched, transfixed by the impossible apparition, until a primal surge of terror overwhelmed me. My hand flew to the switches, silencing the pumps. The figure collapsed back into the flood. I sank to my knees in the cold water, denim soaking instantly, my body racked with uncontrollable shaking. Seconds ticked by. One thought consumed me. Something resided beneath that water, something sentient, and it yearned for release. Leaving the pumps dormant, I retreated to the relative safety of the wall, cold concrete a grounding presence against my back. My mind raced, seeking purchase on logic, on sanity. Running felt like the only sensible option, yet abandoning the task felt like a betrayal. Instead, I grabbed an old mop leaning nearby and began futilely pushing water towards the floor drain, the repetitive motion a small anchor in the overwhelming strangeness. My heart rate gradually subsided, but the water level remained stubbornly high. Staying the night in this place was unthinkable. A plumber, a professional, was the only recourse. I made the call on my way out, scheduling an early visit, deliberately avoiding thoughts of the aqueous form, focusing solely on the road ahead. Sleep offered little respite, fractured by nightmares of drowning rooms and distorted whispers. The plumber arrived punctually the next morning, a stolid man whose face betrayed little emotion. I led him to the basement. The water, inevitably, was high once more. He surveyed the scene with professional detachment, saw nothing beyond ordinary flooding, and set up his own powerful pump. We waited. The minutes crawled by. I braced myself for the hum, the voice, the shape, but for nearly half an hour, only the pump's steady thrum broke the silence. The plumber moved methodically, tapping pipes, checking joints. I remained near the center, gaze fixed on the water's surface, a knot tightening in my stomach. Then suddenly it began, the low hum, almost subliminal. I froze. The plumber, engrossed in his examination, seemed oblivious. The voice that followed, soft, muffled yet carrying my name. Still no reaction from the other man. I took an involuntary step closer to the water. The hum intensified. The shape began to form, rising with unnerving speed, reaching, calling my name with greater force now. A faint vibration pulsed through the concrete beneath my boots. "Hey," I called out to the plumber. As he turned, puzzled, the shape instantly dissolved. "What is it?" he asked, his tone neutral. I stammered something about thinking I saw movement in the water. He shrugged, unconvinced, and returned to his inspection. Sweat trickled down my temple. He eventually located a minor crack near the foundation, but admitted it couldn't account for the relentless flooding. He suspected deeper foundation issues, recommended a specialist, packed his tools, and departed around noon. I remained behind, sinking onto the bottom step, staring into the murky water. A perverse curiosity warred with my fear. What if I let the pumps run? What if I saw the shape fully formed? I plugged in my 2 pumps again. Water gushed. The level dropped rapidly. My heart hammered against my ribs. The hum swelled, vibrating through the damp air. My arms trembled. The silhouette surged upwards from the center of the diminishing flood. Taller now, clearer, a distinct head, neck, torso. It called my name, Julian. A dank, earthy odor rose from the disturbed water. My vision swam slightly at the edges. I stared, trying to discern features within the fluid mask. The watery arm extended, stretching towards me across the churning surface. My entire body locked tight. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, a constriction tightening my throat. The silhouette held its form, impossibly solid yet fluid, water dripping from its indistinct contours. The pumps whirred relentlessly. The shape advanced fractionally, then seemed to waver, the voice issuing my name again, slower now, distorted, laced with a chilling desperation. Panic erupted. My hand slammed down on the power strip, cutting the connection. The figure collapsed. The water sloshed violently, then settled. Silence returned, thick and absolute. My boots heavy with water, muscles quivering with adrenaline's aftermath. I backed away slowly, retreating up the stairs. I locked the basement door, leaning against the solid wood as if it could contain the impossible thing below. There was something in the water, something unnatural. It knew my name. It wanted out. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of anxious pacing and fruitless searching through my parents' old papers, receipts for foundation work decades past, but nothing hinting at wells, cisterns, or anything stranger. As evening bled into night, the realization solidified. This required help beyond plumbers or foundation crews. The basement wasn't merely flooded. It harbored something inexplicable, something ancient and aware. I resolved to find specialists, experts in structural anomalies, though doubt lingered. What could they possibly do against such a phenomenon? A profound sense of dread settled over me. Drawing the living room curtains against the encroaching darkness, I attempted to rest on the dusty couch, drifting into a shallow, uneasy doze. Waking abruptly in the dead of night, I knew I couldn't approach the basement again. Not alone, not now. The pumps remained off. Let the water rise. Facing that voice, that shape, in the nocturnal silence was beyond my capacity. Sleep evaded me. The image of the watery figure burned behind my eyelids, the sound of my name echoing in the hollows of my memory. Abandon the house? The thought was tempting, cowardly. Yet it was my parents' legacy, my responsibility. I sat at the kitchen table, watching the slow creep of dawn paint the windows gray, every creak of the old house amplifying my anxiety. Stiffness had seized my body. My eyes burned from sleeplessness. With the first definitive light of morning, I gathered my few belongings, walked out the front door, and drove away, deliberately not looking back. Behind me, the house stood silent, brooding, its cellar slowly filling, holding its secret captive. I didn't know what resided in that water, but I knew, with chilling certainty, that I could not face it alone. Help was needed, help of a kind I couldn't yet imagine. The lonely percussion of my shoes on the pavement punctuated the midnight hush, each strike a stark measure of my solitude. Daylight's vibrant, familiar avenues had dissolved into a labyrinth of shifting silhouettes and whispered threats under the moonless sky. As my stride instinctively lengthened, a cold tendril of apprehension snaked up my neck, and then another rhythm joined mine. Footsteps, heavier, deliberate, locking onto my cadence from behind. In that breath-catching instant, the mundane walk home fractured, revealing the precipice of a nightmare I hadn't foreseen. Ilara, they called me, a chronicler of city whispers, a 28-year veteran of chasing deadlines past respectable hours, accustomed to navigating the urban dark. Tonight, however, felt different, charged with an unfamiliar static. The story, the one poised to etch my name into the industry, had held me captive long after the last skeletal bus rattled away. Exhaustion clouding judgment, I dismissed the wait for a taxi, opting for the mile-long traverse on foot, a profound miscalculation. Initially, I waved away the unease as phantom paranoia. This was my terrain, etched into my muscle memory by countless journeys. But rounding onto a narrower, sleep-shrouded side street, the pursuing steps accelerated, gaining ground. A lightning-quick glance over my shoulder confirmed the dread crystallizing in my veins. 3 figures, faces obscured by the deep cowls of their hoodies, purposefully shrinking the distance. My pace escalated to a near jog, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Logic warred with primal instinct. Stay composed. Don't betray the fear, whispered reason. Run, screamed every nerve ending. Evening, lovely. A voice slithered through the air, laced with an intent that turned my blood to ice. No need to rush, just a conversation. No reply, no backward glance. My gaze frantically scanned the desolate landscape, seeking refuge, a pocket of light or life. Every storefront was shuttered, every window a blind eye. Closer now, their labored breaths were audible, punctuated by low guttural chuckles that raised the hairs on my arms. My fingers tightened around the smooth, cool surface of my phone, buried deep in a pocket, yet the knowledge that stopping to dial would seal my fate held me captive in forward motion. Then, a possibility, a slim fissure between 2 hulking brick buildings, an alleyway I'd shun in daylight. Now, it represented the only potential break in their relentless pursuit. Timing the maneuver to the last possible second, I veered sharply, plunging into the darkness. Curses erupted behind me, sharp and angry, as they registered my evasion. The alley was a treacherous landscape of unseen obstacles, overflowing bins, discarded packaging, amorphous shapes still lurking in the oppressive gloom. Fear, however, lent me an unnatural grace. I vaulted over debris, squeezed between dumpsters, my breathing ragged, desperate. I burst onto another street, gratefully bathed in a slightly brighter sodium glow. But the respite was fleeting. Their enraged shouts echoed nearby, a chilling compass guiding them back to me. I ran as if propelled by demons, lungs searing, muscles screaming protest. Random turns, desperate gambles in the urban maze, hoping to dissolve into the city's anonymity. Yet they mirrored my knowledge of these back streets, relentlessly closing the gap. Rounding a corner, a beacon flared against the oppressive dark, the neon promise of a 24-hour diner. Salvation. With a final, lung-bursting surge, I lunged for the door handle. Just as my fingertips brushed the cool metal, a hand like a vice clamped onto my arm, wrenching me backward. I stumbled, equilibrium lost, finding myself instantly encircled. 3 figures formed an impenetrable wall, their proximity suffocating. "End of the line, sweetheart," rasped the tallest, his voice thick with malice. Trapped, panting, my mind raced, desperately seeking an escape hatch. They loomed, radiating physical superiority. What chance remained? A memory surfaced, a self-defense class years past, a father's anxious gift. The instructor's voice resonated. Use what's there. Improvise. Everything is a potential weapon. My eyes darted, cataloging the immediate environment. The abrasive brick wall at my back, a dented metal trash can adjacent, the loose scatter of gravel underfoot. As the tall one reached, I acted. Scooping a handful of sharp grit, I flung it directly at his face. He recoiled with a yelp, hands flying to his eyes. In that fragment of disarray, I drove my knee upward, connecting hard with his groin. A choked groan escaped him as he crumpled. The remaining 2 descended instantly. A hand tangled violently in my hair, yanking me downward. Panic surged, hot and blinding, but I fought it into submission. Twisting with feral energy, ignoring the searing pain, I bit down hard on the forearm gripping my hair. The coppery taste of blood filled my mouth, alongside a sharp cry of pain, and abruptly, I was free. No hesitation. I sprinted towards the diner's light, screaming with the full force of my terror. "Help! Please, does somebody help me?" I crashed through the door, the overhead bell jangling frantically. Startled faces turned towards the disruption. "Call the police," I choked out between ragged breaths. "They're right outside." The woman behind the counter reacted instantly, her fingers a blur on the phone's keypad. From a booth, a burly older man rose, planting his solid frame like a bulwark between me and the entrance. Through the glass, I saw my assailants hesitate on the sidewalk, weighing their options. Then, the rising keen of a distant siren sliced through the night air, scattering them into the shadows. The adrenaline that had fueled my flight evaporated, leaving me boneless. My legs buckled, depositing me onto the cool linoleum floor, my entire body seized by violent tremors. The waitress hurried over, her arm a comforting weight around my shoulders. "You're okay now, honey," she murmured soothingly. "Safe now. They're coming." The subsequent hours dissolved into a disorienting montage. Clipped questions from uniformed officers, lukewarm coffee in chipped mugs, the concerned, pitying glances of strangers. Dawn was painting the sky in bruised pastels by the time a compassionate female officer escorted me home. Inside my apartment, door double-locked and bolted, the magnitude of the night crashed down. I collapsed onto the sofa, tears finally breaking free, tears of raw fear, of violated safety, of an innocence irrevocably lost. Yet beneath the grief, a different heat began to rise, a simmering anger, a steely determination. This would not define me. This would not break me. In the days that unfurled, research became my refuge. I devoured information on urban safety, predator behavior, defensive strategies, anything to reclaim a sense of control, to armor myself against helplessness. I enrolled in advanced self-defense, honing reflexes, building resilience. But the city itself transformed under my gaze. I started mapping the neglected corners, the stretches where darkness lingered too long, where vulnerability felt palpable. My terror, I realized, could be transmuted into purpose. I proposed a series to my editor, an exploration of urban safety, peeling back the veneer of security to expose the hidden fault lines in seemingly familiar neighborhoods. He embraced the concept. Months were spent interviewing law enforcement, defense experts, fellow survivors. I wrote about inadequate lighting, the power of community vigilance, the psychological scars left by feeling hunted in one's own habitat. The series resonated. It ignited dialogues, spurred community action, even nudged the city council towards allocating resources for brighter streets and increased patrols. Now, a year removed from that harrowing night, the transformation is undeniable. I am stronger, physically and mentally forged in that crucible of fear. My awareness is heightened, my caution ingrained, yet paradoxically, so is my confidence in navigating whatever challenges arise. The most profound shift, however, lies in my redefined purpose. That night could have driven me inward, shrouded me in perpetual fear. Instead, it ignited a fierce compulsion to make a tangible difference, to wield my words as spotlights in the city's shadowed recesses, striving to make them safer for everyone. Sometimes I still walk home late, but now my head is high, keys strategically positioned between knuckles, pepper spray of familiar weight in my pocket. Alert, yes. Aware, absolutely. But afraid? No. I learned that night that I possess a strength exceeding my fear. I am a survivor, yes, but more. I am actively shaping a narrative of resilience, helping others find their own footing. The city after dark still holds its mysteries, its potential dangers, but I am now part of the effort to bring light, one story, one illuminated street at a time. In that terrifying journey, I unearthed a fortitude I never knew existed, a purpose that transcends mere survival. I am thriving, and in doing so, helping others to thrive as well. That night irrevocably altered my landscape, but it didn't shatter me. It forged me. Gazing out at the sprawling constellation of city lights, a quiet pride settles within me, knowing that somewhere, someone walks a slightly safer path tonight because of the words I've written, the awareness I've cultivated, and that makes every terrifying step of that journey worthwhile. It was a Wednesday, I recall, when the night first offered up its peculiar sound. Sleep was a distant shore I couldn't reach, adrift as I was on the silence, until a thin, errant melody trickled through the gap in my window sash. Initially, I dismissed it, the wind perhaps, sighing through the gnarled limbs of the ancient trees bordering the property. Yet this was no mere soughing. A pattern lurked within its slowness, its staggering rhythm. Compelled, I rose and parted the curtains. A stark moon presided over a landscape unnervingly still. A sudden visceral thrumming started beneath my ribs, a response triggered by the thought of the forsaken manor house down the lane. Curiosity had led me through its decaying grandeur before. I knew the vast main hall housed a concert grand piano, mute beneath a shroud of dust, its voice surely broken by years of neglect. Still, an illogical certainty bloomed. The fractured tune emanated from within those very walls. A jacket thrown hastily over my shoulders, I stepped out into the cool embrace of the night, drawn towards the manor's dark mass. Street lamps cast feeble pools of light, haloed by the chill air that turned my breath to fleeting vapor. Each footfall seemed to gain weight, anchoring me more firmly to the pavement, even as my resolve wavered. Reaching the skeletal iron gate, its hinges groaning a rusty protest as I pushed it inward, I felt the dampness bloom on my palms. A visceral urge to retreat screamed caution, but the hook of the unknown was sunk too deep. I forced myself onward, up the gravel path choked with defiant weeds. My shoes crunched, the sound disproportionately loud against the manor's silent facade. The great front door, predictably, hung slightly ajar, a permanent invitation or oversight, ignored by a world indifferent to its slow surrender. Inside, the air hung thick with the exhalation of decay, damp plaster, the phantom scent of sodden timber, and the pervasive musk of mold. Lunar shafts, dense with dancing motes, pierced the grime-streaked windows, illuminating soaring ceilings webbed with shadows and walls shedding their paper skin like ancient reptiles. To my right, a wide staircase swept upwards into darkness, but my attention fixed elsewhere. Fainter now, yet undeniable, the ghost notes of the piano drifted from the mansion's deeper recesses. I moved, propelled towards the sound down a corridor leading to the grand hall. My legs felt strangely insubstantial, yet they carried me past cobweb-draped corners and floors filmed with neglect. Faded portraits lined the walls, their occupants dissolving into obscurity. I averted my gaze, uninterested in forgotten faces, only in the source of that disquieting music. As I neared the broad arched entryway to the hall, the melody sharpened fractionally. It remained a stumbling affair, notes landing true alongside others jarringly off-key, the tempo dragging, hesitant. Stepping over the threshold, I saw it, the hulking grand piano positioned centrally, its lid propped open, and the keys, the pale ivories, still were moving, depressing, rising, falling silent, then moving again, guided by no visible hand. No one occupied the bench. I froze, suspended in the doorway. The frantic drummer residing in my chest pounded a dizzying rhythm against my ribs. My mouth turned instantly to sand. For several heartbeats, I simply watched those keys dance their nonsensical jig, a discordant pattern, loud yet clashing. The bass notes attempted a steady, mournful bass line, punctuated by inexplicable gaps, while the treble tapped out random high-pitched sighs. It sounded like a memory of sorrow, attempted by fingers that couldn't quite recall the shape of grief. Hesitantly, I advanced. The scuff of my shoe on the dust-laden floorboards startled me, a sharp intrusion into the spectral performance. The piano continued, unperturbed. I could see the worn surfaces of the keys dip and return, a phantom articulation. Close enough now to reach out, my hand trembled. I laid my fingers on the cool, smooth curve of the instrument's casing. The wood felt colder than the surrounding air, a deep, penetrating chill. Cracks spiderwebbed the varnish. The finish was chipped and scarred. It looked utterly derelict, a relic abandoned to time, yet possessed by this impossible motion. The sound reverberated in the cavernous space above. A constriction tightened in my chest, urging retreat, but I held my ground, mesmerized, searching the haphazard sequence for logic. Fleetingly, a slow, melancholic phrase would almost cohere, hinting at a recognizable tune, before dissolving again into dissonant chords that made me flinch. Leaning closer, I peered over the keyboard, scanning for wires, some hidden mechanism. Nothing. The bench beneath sat empty, draped in shadow. Moonlight glinted weakly off the moving ivory. Taking a ragged breath, I inhaled the scent of aged wood and settled dust, swallowing against the dryness in my throat, attempting to soothe the frantic pulse hammering at my temples. Whispers from neighbors surfaced in my mind, tales of the manor being haunted, dismissed previously as local folklore clinging to a creepy, neglected property. The word now resonated with unnerving possibility. My hand hovered, then darted out towards a descending key. My fingertip brushed the surface just as it moved, encountering only air. Yet the key depressed under some unseen pressure. A jolt shot up my arm. I snatched my hand back. I listened intently to the discordant lament for another minute. It sounded uncertain, hesitant, like a novice fumbling through a lesson without guidance. My legs felt unsteady. I stepped back, bracing myself. My breathing was shallow, rapid. Sweat beaded on my forehead, and I wiped it away with my sleeve. A faint draft stirred through a shattered pane in a far corner, causing the tattered curtains to sway, momentarily admitting a brighter wash of moonlight. The piano lid cast an elongated, distorted shadow on the far wall, vaguely anthropomorphic, a hunched silhouette born of wood and light. Circling the instrument, I peered into its shadowed depths, half expecting to uncover the trick. Only the wooden frame, the intricate harp of strings, and layers of grime met my gaze. The faint lunar glow struggled to penetrate the interior, but I could discern the metal plate holding the strings, rusted in patches. A few strings looked slack, detached. No rational explanation for the sound, for the motion presented itself. A tremor began in my hands, a deep churning in my stomach. I was adrift in a moment, utterly defiant of sense. After what felt like an eternity, I noticed the melody faltering, the intervals between notes lengthening, as if the unseen player were tiring, losing focus. A final, jarring chord clanged, a messy fistful of sound. Then silence descended. The keys ceased their movement. The sudden quiet pressed in, making my ears ring. My heart still hammered against my ribs. I stood frozen, anticipating, but the stillness held. Taking hesitant steps backward, my eyes remained fixed on the piano, expecting it to spring back to life. It remained inert. Decision made, I turned, the sound of my own footsteps on the wooden floor suddenly intrusive, loud. Reaching the foyer, I paused by the front door, casting one last glance towards the darkened hall. Silence reigned. I slipped outside, pulling the door partially closed behind me. The cool night air felt blessedly normal, yet an internal chill lingered, impervious to the external temperature. The following day unfolded with a forced semblance of normality. Work, dinner, television, the rituals of the mundane. But the piano occupied a persistent space in my thoughts. Had fatigue conjured the entire episode? A waking dream? Yet the memory was sharp, tactile, the unnatural cold of the wood, the jarring dissonance of the phantom melody. I resolved to keep the experience locked away. Confessing it would only invite disbelief, perhaps ridicule. A week crawled by. Sleep remained elusive. Each night I strained my ears, listening past the familiar hum of the refrigerator, the distant sigh of traffic, the sporadic bark of a neighborhood dog. Nothing. But then, coinciding with the next full moon, it returned. Near midnight, the thin, fractured tune crept back into my awareness. I knew its strange signature instantly. My muscles tensed. A cold sweat prickled my skin. For a heartbeat, I fought the pull, tried to dismiss it. But the hook of curiosity, now barbed with familiarity, was too strong. Shoes, the sweatshirt, the familiar path under the stark lunar glow. The same rusted gate, so the same heavy anticipation settling in my chest. Inside, the echo of my steps in the foyer seemed louder this time. I went directly to the hall. The keys were already in motion as I entered, weaving the same halting, sorrowful tapestry of sound I remembered. Clashing notes, yet within the chaos, that persistent, almost familiar pattern struggled to emerge. Carefully, I approached. My breath hitched. This time, I sat on the edge of the piano bench, maintaining a careful distance from the spectral performance zone. Placing my hand near the moving keys, not touching, I felt it. A distinct coolness emanating from their vicinity, like a localized draft. I watched them rise and fall. Sometimes a key would seem to hesitate midair, as if undecided. The proximity amplified the sound, sending shivers tracing paths along my spine. I peered again at the strings inside. They vibrated visibly with each corresponding key strike, shuddering with the impact of the unseen hammers. My chest felt tight, my shoulders rigid, but I remained wanting to understand, to witness. After a minute, I dared to intervene. Selecting a key I guessed might harmonize with the faltering pattern, I pressed it. The piano responded with a dull, flat tone, painfully out of tune. The invisible presence paused its playing for a beat, a momentary suspension, as if acknowledging the intrusion. Then it resumed, ignoring my contribution, returning to its established, melancholic meandering. Swallowing hard against the lump forming in my throat, I tried another key. Again, a pause, followed by a couple of arbitrary notes from the phantom player, before it lapsed back into its original, random seeming sequence. A strange notion surfaced. Perhaps it was attempting to replicate a forgotten song, constantly faltering, stumbling over the notes, collapsing into discordant frustration before trying again with the same depressed uncertainty. I lost track of time sitting there. 10 minutes, perhaps longer. An ache settled in my lower back from the tense posture. My palms grew damp. The music continued its broken journey until, abruptly, as before, it ceased. The final note resonated, hung suspended in the air, then dissolved into the profound silence. The keys settled, motionless. I passed my hand slowly above them, feeling for residual energy, any lingering vibration. Nothing. The hall felt unnervingly empty, the sudden quiet almost deafening. I rose, my legs stiff, my breathing uneven. I traced the edge of the piano again, the cracked wood rough beneath my fingertips. Questions swirled unanswered. I had witnessed the impossible, or at least the inexplicable by any ordinary measure. That night, returning home felt different, imbued with a deeper disquiet. Sleep offered no refuge, my mind replaying the image of the lonely piano, trapped in its endless, flawed recital. But I consciously pushed away interpretations involving ghosts or spirits. Such concepts felt too defined, too easy. I knew only what I had seen, what I had heard. Over the ensuing month, the pull became irresistible. On random nights, I found myself walking the now familiar path to the manor. Sometimes the hall was silent, the piano merely a dusty sentinel. Other times, the broken melody greeted me, already in progress. Each encounter brought the same initial surge of tension, skin prickling, senses hyper-alert. I watched the keys experiment, repeat phrases, get stuck on a high, reedy note. The eeriness remained, yet a strange sort of acclimatization occurred. The presence felt less threatening, more melancholy perhaps, just profoundly unsettling. One evening, equipped with a few basic tools gleaned from my limited knowledge, I decided to attempt a minor intervention. Perhaps tightening a few strings, tuning a key or two, might clarify the sound, even if performed by amateur hands. Propping the heavy lid fully open, I examined the dusty interior, the rusted metal frame. Lifting the narrow panel covering the tuning pins revealed many looking corroded, loose. Gingerly, I applied a wrench to one pin, turning it slightly. A protesting creak, a subtle shift in the string's tension. Testing the corresponding key produced a marginally clearer, less jarring tone. Encouraged, I continued for perhaps half an hour, adjusting the most accessible pins, my hands becoming coated in grime. Suddenly, a single faint note chimed from the piano, sharp and clear. I hadn't touched a key. My heart leaped into my throat. I froze, wrench still in hand. The note sounded again, twice, almost inquisitive, like someone testing the newly tuned string. Then silence. My nerves screamed. Setting the tool down carefully, I backed away. The key remained still, enough for one night. Packing my tools, I left, a fine tremor running through me as I walked back towards the gate. Reaching the sidewalk, I drew a deep draft of the cool night air, consciously slowing my racing pulse. I hadn't solved the enigma. The piano remained a vessel of the inexplicable, but a realization dawned. My fear was now intertwined with a potent fascination. The decaying manor, the solitary hall, the self-playing piano, It was a nexus of the strange that unsettled me to my core, yet I couldn't sever the connection. The lunar cycle became my unwilling clock. As the moon waxed towards fullness, a familiar prickle of anxiety would begin. I'd fall asleep listening, waiting, and when the first hesitant notes inevitably arrived, I would rise, walk the path, and bear witness once more to the piano's broken, melancholy performance. The keys jumping, pausing, searching, striking dissonant chords under an invisible force. My heart would pound, my stomach clench, but still, I returned. No explanation ever materialized. No spectral figure revealed itself. No voice whispered from the shadows. Nothing beyond the moving keys, the discordant sounds echoing in the cavernous room, defying the mundane world outside. Now I accept its presence, its strange lunar rhythm. The thought of revealing this secret, of inviting crowds or potential destruction, feels like a betrayal. What would happen if someone silenced it? Would the hall finally rest? Perhaps. Or perhaps it would feel like extinguishing a fragile, inexplicable light, leaving only an empty silence where a mystery once resided. The cold grip of fears still seizes me whenever I hear that first tentative note filter through the night. My scalp tingles, my stomach lurches, my palms grow damp. Yet I continue my pilgrimage. The keys still move, the notes remain fractured, the hall continues its slow decay. Nothing changes, nothing resolves. I am merely the custodian of an observation, a witness to something profoundly strange, adrift in the currents of the unexplained, and that remains the shape of it. The night nearly claimed me, fatigue a heavy cloak draped over my shoulders. Checks completed, the vast, shadowed cavern of the theater exhaled around me, urging me toward the exit, toward home. Escape was paramount, yet arrested mid-step, I heard it. A delicate thread of sound spun through the speaker linked to the main stage microphone. A woman's voice, humming an unfamiliar, ethereal tune. In that suspended moment, the mundane shattered. I pivoted near the mixing console, my gaze drawn irresistibly to the vacant stage, a void beneath the ghost light. My pulse leapt, a frantic drum against my ribs. No one. The stage was starkly empty, the sound system slumbering on standby. A phantom signal? Interference bleeding across frequencies? Logic scrabbled for purchase, but the sound felt intentional. One last check, I reasoned, a final sweep of the lines before surrendering to the night. Midnight crept closer as I meticulously traced every cable, tested each input, finding only perfect order. Yet the hum lingered, an echo imprinted on my mind. Returning the following afternoon for the pre-show diagnostics, I relished the solitude. The theater felt different in the daylight, less spectral, more functional. Power amps hummed to life, microphones registered the ambient silence, pure, unadulterated quiet, no static whispers, no melodic phantoms. The evening's performance unfolded without a hitch. Afterward, amidst the familiar ritual of gathering stray cables, coiling them with practiced hands, the stage felt benign. I secured the heavy back door, plunged the main stage into darkness, and descended to the booth for the final shutdown. Then it returned. The same voice, clearer now, weaving a different sequence of notes, a liquid cascade in the stillness. A cold tingle traced my nape, skin tightening involuntarily. I swallowed, forcing calm. From the booth, I threw the stage lights back on, bathing the crimson curtains and rows of vacant seats in stark illumination, empty. The aisles, the stage, the balconies, utterly deserted. Yet the sound persisted, undeniably channeled through the monitors. The fine hairs on my arms prickled upright, a vice clamped around my chest. Methodically, I muted each channel one by one. The voice held fast until the master mute silenced the entire board. Abruptly, it vanished. The next morning, I ventured the story to Lena and Dmitri. Their expressions shifted from polite interest to thinly veiled disbelief. Fatigue, they suggested, long hours playing tricks. I offered no argument, retreating behind a wall of certainty. Exhaustion, I knew intimately. Hallucination, I did not. My profession demanded an ear attuned to the subtlest nuance, the faintest hiss, the deepest resonance. This was different. During the afternoon lull, driven by a need for empirical proof, I launched a full diagnostic assault on the system. Hours bled away tracing microphone leads, scrutinizing wireless packs, verifying frequencies, examining every capacitor and connection. The equipment was flawless. A part of me yearned for the anomaly to cease, to be relegated to a technical gremlin. But a deeper, more insistent part, a nascent curiosity bordering on obsession, craved another encounter, a confirmation that wasn't rooted in faulty wiring. That evening hosted a chamber music ensemble. I remained backstage, managing the delicate balance of microphones, while Serafina, the stage manager, orchestrated the cues from the wings. Routine held sway. Post-performance, the familiar cycle began, clearing equipment, coiling cables, dousing lights. Back in the booth's isolating embrace, a tremor of apprehension ran through me as I keyed the main microphone for a final check. Testing, I murmured, my voice flat in the quiet, watching the level meters dance predictably. 1, 2, silence. A wave of fragile relief washed over me. Then a whisper, insidious and soft, breathed through the monitors. My name, Elias. I froze, rigid in my chair. A woman's voice, languid and low. The console meters barely registered a flicker, yet the sound was undeniable, bypassing logic, striking some primal chord within. A sudden heat bloomed in my chest, my mouth turning to dust, palms slick with sweat. I swiveled, scanning the shadowed auditorium. Nothing stirred. The stage remained a dark maw. No movement, no presence. Leaning into the microphone, my voice raspy, I managed, "Who's there?" Only a low, indifferent crackle answered. Pushing back from the chair, I descended to the stage level, flipping the harsh work lights. The entire space sprang into sharp relief, rows upon rows of plush seats, the stark geometry of the aisles, the vast expanse of the stage. Still empty. An inexplicable compulsion made me lower my voice. Is anyone here? The question echoed, swallowed by the immense volume of the hall. Silence responded. I prowled the backstage labyrinth, checking dressing rooms thick with the ghosts of grease paint and perfume, peering into shadowed hallways, probing darkened corners. Each space yielded only emptiness. Returning to the booth, I killed the power with decisive clicks and forced myself toward the exit, a profound tremor unsettling my limbs. Marco, my counterpart on the lighting crew, met my hesitant account the next day with a knowing smirk. Need a holiday, Elias? He'd chuckled, clapping my shoulder. I couldn't fault his skepticism. It sounded like cheap melodrama, a ghost story cliché. but the certainty remained lodged in my gut, cold and heavy. Something resided within these walls. That evening, I arrived deliberately early, possessed by a need to investigate further. I ascended the narrow iron staircase to the catwalks, navigating the dizzying height above the stage. Dust motes danced in the beams of my flashlight, illuminating a forgotten world of thick cables, ancient rigging, and discarded gel frames. Nothing remotely capable of generating a disembodied female voice. Around 5, Serafina breezed in, announcing a small, intimate play for the night's schedule. I kept my disquietude locked away. Throughout the performance, I remained tethered to the sound console, ears straining beneath the dialogue and sound cues. Flawless execution. Later, deep into the post-show routine, stage cleared, microphones stored, cables meticulously wound, lights extinguished, the familiar tension began to coil in the air. Around 11, back in the booth, finalizing a patch cable configuration, I felt it. A palpable weight, a thickening of the silence. Then the faintest hum returned. I activated the monitors. The hum swelled, resolving into that strange, seductive melody. My ribcage seemed to vibrate in sympathy. My focus narrowed, locking onto the darkened stage. Tentatively, I opened a single channel on the console, attempting to isolate the source. Instead, a whisper slithered from the speakers. "Come here." My body jerked as if struck, teeth clenched, sweat prickling my brow. A call, a command. I couldn't form a response. The voice repeated, gentle yet utterly unnerving, "Come here." My stomach twisted into a knot. I pushed away from the console, propelled by a force that wasn't entirely my own. Down the stairs, onto the main floor, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My legs felt strangely disconnected, moving down the center aisle toward the looming stage. Why this compulsion? Why the irrational urge to obey? The voice breathed my name again, so softly it was almost lost in the ambient hum of the building. Elias. I mounted the stage, the floorboards groaning under my weight. Only the single, unwavering ghost light offered illumination, casting long, distorted shadows. My eyes scanned the heavy velvet curtains, the ropes disappearing into the fly space, the painted backdrop depicting a forgotten forest. Everything appeared static, yet a sense of unseen movement prickled the air. Slipping behind the main curtain, I navigated past stacked flats and a shrouded grand piano, silent for decades. The voice ceased. I stood motionless, straining to hear anything beyond the low thrum of the HVAC system and the frantic pulse pounding in my ears. A soft laugh, low and intimate, drifted from the stage left wing. I spun, nearly tangling in a coil of cable, flashlight beams stabbing into the darkness. It pinpointed a door, the entrance to the basement storage, a place I rarely ventured, choked with dust and discarded theatrical dreams. The laughter seemed to emanate from its vicinity. Drawn forward, I swept the light across peeling paint, stained concrete, haphazard stacks of forgotten set pieces. The door handle turned easily, unlocked. Pushing it open, I peered into the abyss. Dust motes swirled in the flashlight's cone, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. I stepped onto the top stair, testing its solidity. My shoes scraped grit. Behind me, the heavy door swung shut with a dull thud that echoed in the confined space. I flinched, a sharp intake of breath escaping me. My hands trembled. "Hello?" My voice sounded thin, absorbed by the stone walls. No reply. Reaching the bottom, I scanned the subterranean chamber. Rows of metal shelves bowed under the weight of obsolete props, defunct lighting fixtures, and spectral costumes. Empty folding chairs huddled in a corner like patient mourners. The air felt denser here, colder. Fumbling, I found the string for the bare overhead bulb. It flickered erratically before casting a weak, yellow glow over the dust and cobwebs. I moved cautiously, peering behind shelves, under draped tables. Nothing. No one. A creeping dread began to bloom. This was a mistake. My skin crawled. The urge to retreat became overwhelming. As I turned towards the stairs, the voice whispered my name again, Elias. So close, the sound seemed to bypass my ears and imprint directly onto my nerves. Hair rose on my scalp. I whirled, flashlight beam dancing frantically. A shadow flickered near a stack of leaning flats, then vanished. My pulse thundered, shaking my hand. Words caught in my constricted throat. I forced my legs to move, approaching the towering set pieces, breath held tight, convinced something monstrous waited to spring. Nothing. I kicked aside brittle cardboard boxes, revealing only more dust and debris. Then, the faintest sensation, a brush of cool air against the back of my neck, intimate as an exhalation. My entire body seized. I spun again, light cutting arcs through the gloom. A single word, whispered so low it was almost subliminal. Stay. My knees buckled, invisible, yet undeniably present. My mind struggled for clarity against the hammering in my chest, the sweat plastering my shirt to my skin. Escape. Now. I yanked the light cord, plunging the basement back into darkness, scrambled up the concrete steps, and burst through the door. The backstage area seemed preternaturally normal, yet my senses screamed danger. I half expected an apparition to materialize. Nothing. Setting the flashlight on a nearby crate, I strode onto the stage, locked the basement door firmly behind me, deliberately ignoring the faint echo that seemed to follow. I fled to the booth, shut down the remaining systems with frantic haste, and bolted through the main entrance, not even pausing to properly secure the locks. The shaking didn't subside until I was home, burrowed under covers, the silence of my apartment feeling thin and fragile. The following days were steeped in low-grade anxiety. I maneuvered to avoid being the last one in the theater, fabricating reasons for early departures. But the demands of the job were relentless. Inevitably, closing duties fell to me again. On that particular night, I vowed efficiency, swift checks, silent cable coiling. I'd even put quiet music on my phone, a flimsy shield against the anticipated silence. It proved useless. Minutes into my work, the music abruptly ceased. My phone screen glowed, the track paused as if by an unseen hand. Then, through the monitors, crisp and clear, the voice, Elias. My hands began their familiar tremor, my mouth instantly dry. "Don't ignore me," it commanded, the tone less ethereal, more insistent. I nearly dropped the phone. My breathing grew shallow, rapid. "What do you want?" I muttered, the words feeling absurdly theatrical, addressed to the empty air. The response seemed to materialize directly behind me. "Follow." My heart slammed against my ribs with painful force. Hesitantly, I moved toward the stage door, eyes darting left and right, searching the shadowed corridors for any sign of intrusion. Empty. Dark. I hovered at the threshold, instinct screaming retreat, while a perverse curiosity urged me onward. I crept through the backstage maze, footsteps muffled on the worn floorboards, senses hyper alert. A low hum surfaced, a single sustained note pulling me toward the stage left wing. I followed it past looming crates and racks draped in ghostly costumes, stopping finally before a locked supply closet. The hum vanished. I tried the knob, secured fast. A jolt of frustration, sharp and unexpected. What secrets did this insignificant door conceal? I backed away, conceding defeat for the night. Back in the booth, I gathered my belongings and fled the building, my mind consumed by the locked closet. It held old, forgotten sound gear, junk, essentially. Why there? I resolved to ask Serafina for the key. Sleep offered little respite, my dreams haunted by whispers and locked doors. The next morning, feigning a need for inventory, I asked Serafina about the closet. She shrugged, unconcerned, and produced a small, tarnished key from a crowded ring. Her casual indifference felt jarring against my internal turmoil. I waited, nerves stretched taut, until the theater emptied once more, cloaked in its nocturnal silence. Around 10, key clutched in my damp palm, I approached the closet. The faint scent of fresh paint hung in the hallway. My own footsteps sounded unnervingly loud on the concrete. Reaching the door, I inserted the key. The lock yielded with a decisive click. I pushed the door inward and fumbled for the light switch. A single bulb flickered overhead, illuminating a cramped space crammed with relics, shelves laden with skeletal mixers, defunct microphones tangled in Gordian knots of cable, dusty road cases slumped on the floor. I stepped inside, scanning the forgotten detritus. Nothing seemed amiss, nothing to explain the haunting. Then the light flickered violently. A chill permeated the small room, accompanied by an odd, compressing pressure in my chest. The hum returned, soft yet resonant, seeming to emanate from the very walls around me. I lifted the lid of a large mixer case. Inside lay a vintage console, thick with dust, coiled wires like dormant snakes, a scattering of spare fuses. In one corner, scratched into the casing beneath layers of gaffer tape, was a name, faded and illegible. The hum intensified, a physical vibration now. Adrenaline surged. I glanced back at the open doorway. The corridor remained empty. "I'm here," I whispered, the words feeling thick and clumsy. "What do you want me to see?" The hum ceased abruptly. Silence descended, broken only by the ragged sound of my own breathing. Then a sigh, impossibly close, feathering the air behind my ear. I spun, flashlight beam cutting through the small space. Nothing. My lungs burned, sweat trickled down my spine. Leaning heavily against a shelf, I fought to regain control. Without warning, the overhead bulb extinguished, plunging the closet into near total darkness, save for the wavering beam of my flashlight. A hushed whisper followed, words indistinct but felt, warm and disturbingly intimate, against my ear. My body locked rigid. Scrabbling blindly, I lunged for the doorway, desperate for escape. Flashlight aimed ahead, I stumbled forward. Just as I reached the threshold, poised to flee, it spoke my name again. Elias, clear as crystal, intimate as a lover's breath, inches away. I froze, unable to turn, unable to look back. Nausea churned, knees threatening to give way. I forced myself out, slammed the door shut, fumbled with the lock until it clicked. Then I ran, down the hallway, toward the exit, not caring about the lights left burning, needing only air, escape. Outside, Leaning against the cool brickwork, I gasped for breath, body trembling, slick with cold sweat. A headache pulsed behind my eyes. This presence, this voice, it had led me to that closet. But for what purpose? Was it a warning? An invitation? It felt parasitic, feeding on my fear, drawing me deeper into its spectral domain. The theater itself felt sentient, watchful. I wouldn't go back in there tonight. Explanations to colleagues were futile. Their disbelief was a solid wall. In the nights that followed, the voice became a recurring motif in my solitude. Sometimes a fleeting snatch of melody, sometimes my name sighed on the edge of hearing. The pull remained, a terrifying undertow beneath the surface of my fear. I streamlined my closing routine, becoming brutally efficient, minimizing my time alone in the echoing space. Yet the tension never fully dissipated. Each time the last actor departed, each time the house lights dimmed, my muscles would clench, bracing for the inevitable whisper, the familiar chill. I haven't returned to the basement. The supply closet remains locked, its secrets undisturbed. But the voice persists, a haunting resonance just beyond the range of normal hearing, waiting, wanting. Perhaps it wants discovery, perhaps it wants surrender. I tell myself it's manageable, a phantom of the wires, an auditory illusion. But the lie tastes thin, it's real. And every night, as the silence deepens, and I become the last soul remaining, I feel its presence gather, waiting,